Howdy guys, welcome to another episode from the Foundry where I give monkey brain advice to DMs along with tips and how-to guides using my campaign as an example. Today will be part 1 of a 2-part how-to guide as I will be going over how to create a legendary monster from a normal stat block. If you're like me, you probably have a party that can pretty easily steamroll most encounters you throw at them, assuming there isn't some gimmick preventing that. This can be a bit frustrating when you're trying to give them a challenge, but not completely destroy them by dropping a Tarrasque or a few adult dragons on the battlefield. This is why there are legendary creatures. Think about any story you might have read where there was a quest or a rumor about this mythical monster or powerful demon or unmatched bandit that's hidden away somewhere. When the hero ventures off to find them, it becomes this epic encounter where both sides struggle to one-up each other until finally the enemy falls. This is the feeling and moment we want to create for our players. Not just some big monster that they give the big bonk to in 1 or 2 rounds, killing our monster. There are 2 different methods to go about this. One has a stronger focus on the mechanics and the action economy, while the other focuses more on the story and thematic nature of the encounter itself. I'll be showing you the mechanical method today, with the more thematic method being in part 2, so make sure you get subscribed so you don't miss that video. I think the easier method to create this legendary creature is the mechanical one. You take a normal stat block, identify its fighting styles, tweak a few numbers, add some actions, flavor, and bam! You got yourself a legendary creature and an epic encounter for your party. And hopefully not a TPK. In 5th edition, we don't get any clear guidelines to create a legendary monster. Just a few lines in the DMG and the monster manual that mention legendary creatures and some balancing guidelines for after it's already done. Now I'll briefly go over the steps in making your creature legendary. I have 3 different example templates later on so you can see how it all works and looks in the end. These templates will include a more martial type creature, a flying creature, and a caster. I'll show the math on screen as I discuss the changes for the templates along with the link to the site that I used to create the stat blocks in the description down below. The process to create a legendary creature can be broken down to 5 parts. The first 2 parts are what I would consider mandatory, while the last 3 are a little bit more optional. The first part of legendarification is to improve your creature's ability to survive more than 1 or 2 rounds. We do this by increasing their hit points, because we can change anything we want about this creature, but it amounts to nothing if they still die after 1 round. Well, part 2 is to give your creature a better action economy. After that, we can determine based on our party's composition, magic items available to them, or our campaign's plot or rumors that we might have laid out beforehand, if our legendary creature should get legendary resistances, lair actions, or even some minions. Now, let's start with part 1. Increasing the survivability can be done in one of 2 different ways. Option 1 is to wiggle away the math and simply just double the creature's hit points, rounding a bit before if necessary. The second option does about the same in the end, but with a bit more granularity. First, we increase the total hit dice the creature has by 1 to 3 die, and then increase their constitution score by either 2 or 4 points total. Now, instead of taking the average for calculating the creature's hit points, we will use the maximum total hit points possible for the creature. In the end, we roughly equate to about the same, but it differs still. Now, since we're already adjusting the stats, if our creature doesn't already have proficiency in constitution saving throws, especially as a caster, we'll have to give them proficiency here. This way, it gives them a fighting chance to resist debuffs or even maintain concentration on spells as a party gangs up on them. Now that our creature can survive a few more rounds, we can move on to part 2, giving them a legendary action economy. Don't overthink this part too much and just keep it simple. If your creature has an ability to knock a target prone or grapple them even, then give them a bonus action to make a stomp attack for prone targets or even another melee attack against their grappled foe. If your creature doesn't have either of these 2 things, then we can just move on to reactions. Most creatures don't have a reaction ability aside from opportunity attacks if they aren't spellcasters. Similarly to the bonus actions, we need to think about what type of creature we have and what makes sense for them. If they are weapon masters or super dexterous by nature, then maybe we give them a parry reaction that increases their AC by 3 against 1 melee attack that would normally hit them. If they play a more intimidating or bruiser type role, then instead let's give them a reaction to brace themselves, which can either mean taking half damage from the next attack they receive or posing disadvantage against a melee attack as they try and use their size to bully the players off. Lastly, when adjusting the action economy of our legendary creature, we have to give them 3 legendary actions. Again, we're going to keep these very simple. These actions take place at the end of another another creature's turn and should be used to give your legendary creature a sense of danger by supporting them, shoring up their lack of impact between turns of getting pounced on by the party. Your legendary actions do this by allowing your creature to either gather information, attack, reposition, or potentially even use a special attribute they might have at some point before their next turn. If your creature is a spellcaster, I would hesitate to let it use a spell that isn't a cantrip as a legendary action, as this could potentially devastate the party. Determining which actions your creature has and how much each of these actions cost is very simple. If your creature was a strategic sort and wanted to gather information on the battlefield or detect where someone might have gone into hiding, that would cost a single action. Any attack they might want to do that doesn't have an extra damaging effect could safely be used as a single legendary action also. This means attacks with a melee weapon or a ranged weapon for non-casters, or the use of a cantrip for casters. Attacks like Unarmed Strike from the vampire that has an option to grapple is fine too. But attacks like the Bite for vampires, which deals additional necrotic damage, heals the vampire, and reduces the total maximum hit points of one of your players, would definitely not count. These types of attacks would require 2 legendary actions at minimum to use. If your creature wanted to reposition themselves on the battlefield, that would cost 2 legendary actions to perform. The reason being the impact it has for your creature. Having them in the right place at the right time could be a major game changer. The creature could be cutting the party in half, or cornering the healer, or better yet, breaking line of sight from the party caster who is ready to target them with the spell. Maybe they close in on your party even, making the sorcerer think twice before they unleash that fireball on them. Lastly, we have the forbidden jutsus, the trump card, the punch they've thrown 10,000 times and perfected that made them this legendary creature to begin with, or simply the feature that could really disrupt the flow of combat. This game changer move is the big boy that they break out between players' turns to throw a big wrench in their plans. Not many creatures have something like this, and that's okay. It isn't always necessary for your legendary creature to have one of these, but if it is your big bad evil guy that your party's been preparing for weeks or months, maybe take some extra time to give them an ability like this. Some examples of abilities that would fall into this category are the Ink Cloud from the Kraken or Disrupt Life from the Lich. These abilities are used to quickly turn the tides of the battle, probably making the party change their plans mid-combat and change the win condition even for the encounter itself. But this ability should never be something that outright TPKs the party, but instead instills the fear of the math blocks into them. Moving on to part 3, this is the first optional part of the legendarification process. We need to determine if our party has any super cheeky tactics that they've been abusing to overcome challenges up to this point in the campaign. If so, we should look into giving our creature legendary resistances. You should also consider giving them these resistances if they are a major player in your campaign's plot. Remember, they can only use these resistances on something that they can see. So if your party found a creative solution or workaround for your encounter, that doesn't mean you should shut it down with legendary resistances. Let them feel powerful and reward the creativity. Legendary resistances prevent epic encounters from becoming gimmick fights that end in one turn because of a single saber suck move. They compensate for a major weakness our creature might have, allowing them to stand and fight while being outnumbered. After determining if legendary resistances are needed, we need to look at the arena our players will be fighting in. Is this location key or integral to our plot, or even the lore of the creature? If it is, then we need to think about providing lair actions for this creature. Lair actions happen on initiative count 20 and can't repeat on consecutive rounds, so we would need to think of at least 2 different actions for the lair. These actions should serve one of the following purposes: control the party's movements or tactics, deal damage, or even provide a buff or debuff. An easy way to approach these lair actions is to first look at environmental hazards or traps a legendary creature might have set up beforehand. Another thing you can look at is using spells as lair actions, as noted in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. When I think of lair actions, I remember my WoW days when I would participate in raids or even boss fights in the Soulsborne games. You should foreshadow some of the things that the environment could do, like in a volcanic type arena, have parts of the lava bubble up or the ground turn red right before it erupts. Other examples would be if your legendary creature set up traps beforehand so they can activate them later, dropping a log or releasing a cloud of poisonous gas, or have parts of the ice cave crack and collapse altogether, splitting the party up. If the whole Lair action is supposed to do damage either by mimicking a spell like lightning bolt or triggering a trap, then it's important to remember that the damage shouldn't be devastating. Its purpose is to soften up the party. Help your legendary creature defend their base. A good rule of thumb is to have the Lair action do about 1d6 or so times the proficiency bonus of the creature. If the effect pretty much can't be avoided, then drop the damage to d4s instead. If it's very telegraphed and can only affect one player, you could possibly get away with using d8s instead for this damage. An example of a Lair action you'd want to drop the damage on would be an ice cave, where the Lair action has a blast of cold wind and ice shards shoot throughout the whole arena, damaging anyone who isn't behind some kind of cover. Maybe your Lair is a powerful location and has a high magic density, allowing your creature to regain an expended spell slot, or even heal them. Maybe the environment has a chance to trigger a buffing spell on your creature for a round, giving them bark skin or the movement bonus of haste. Maybe instead of buffing your creature, the Lair action debuffs the party instead, causing them to be blinded or stunned. You could even possibly have it have the effect of the sleep spell cast at 3rd level or slow while they're in this zone. Now, I'd be very cautious when having Lair actions that either buff or debuff the party or the monster at low levels, as this could quickly lead to a TPK. It makes more sense at higher level boss fights when your players have more options or ways to navigate these types of hazards. Remember, the Lair actions you come up with shouldn't negatively affect or hinder your creature itself. This is their Lair, you know? They should be aware of everything their Lair can do and how to utilize and avoid these potential hazards. Another potential Lair action that perfectly leads into the last step would be calling in reinforcements or minions, for example. Is your legendary creature someone who has followers or servants that work for them? That's a pretty simple question to think about when it comes to this step. Leaders, like the head of a cult, would have followers that can come in periodically to provide aid, or an illithid who has fighters under his command, he can send them into battle for him, while the loathsome monster holding the village hostage might not, or the lone wandering knight that continues to stand guard over the resting place of his fallen company. Minions should feel overwhelming without actually posing serious danger to the party. If you're thinking of providing a static amount of minions that won't replenish during the fight, you can get away with keeping them at their original stats. However, if your numbers are going to continue to grow as the fight continues, then I would recommend dropping their hit points to either 1 if they come in groups, or drop it into something around the range of 15 to 20. This is under the assumption that the party is level 5 on average, so adjust their health accordingly with your player's level and strength. This keeps the minions as a threat while also ensuring that anyone in your party can take them out in roughly a round each. You don't want them to linger for too long or take multiple players to kill them. And now we have a proper boss fight, one that should provide ample challenge and leave the party with an epic story to regale the taverns and nobles with, but more importantly, it should leave your players with a sense of accomplishment and hopefully a more memorable session. I'll now briefly go over 3 template monsters that I've given the legendary glow up to. One would be a more martial type creature, followed by a flying creature, and lastly a caster. Now, I think it's important to preface before I get into these templates that if you are going to throw a legendary monster at your party, it's very important that you foreshadow this encounter and any new abilities this creature might have. If your party is having a hard time picking up on the clues you drop for them, then maybe reconsider using certain abilities or legendary resistances for your creature. Now, let's get started with our martial monster template using the Oni stat block. As it currently stands, this Oni does not pose a challenge for a level 5 party. So to make him legendary, we just need to follow the same basic 5 steps I just went over. We will be doubling his HP with no need to round beforehand, as it's already a nice even number of 110. I have included what it would look like if we had adjusted the constitution score instead in the stat block. Using that method, the health difference equates to about 10. Now, this allows our Oni to survive quite a few more rounds, and we can now move on to the next step of fixing his action economy. The base stat block doesn't include any attacks that can either knock a creature prone or grapple them, so there will be no additional bonus actions for our Oni. Oni. However, because he will be playing a more bruiser type role in my encounter, I will be giving him a reaction to brace himself. This brace ability will allow him to take half damage from the next attack that he sees and that hits him, as he will be relying heavily on his regeneration ability. For my group in particular, I felt that legendary resistances would be necessary, as I tend to have some pretty cheeky tactics to completely disable encounters against singular creatures. His offensive legendary action will be a single attack with his glaive, while his relocation legendary action will be a trampling charge, which will allow him to move up to half his movement speed through the party, potentially knocking them prone. When it comes to legendary movement, there are a few different ways to approach this. If they are a more nimble creature, then a simple disengage with movement would make a lot more sense, while if they are more of a juggernaut, then a trampling charge would make more sense. This obviously changes based on the type of creature and their movement abilities, which I will go into further detail in the next two templates. Now, in spite of my creature now having an ability to knock a member of the party prone, I personally am not envisioning my legendary Oni as a type to stomp on a downed creature, being very prideful in his own strength and intelligence. While his trump card ability, the secret he only pulls out in dire situations, is to cast invisibility on himself, as he can do this at will. I chose this over his darkness ability only because as I was creating him, I couldn't help but think of Zabuza from Part 1 Naruto and how he had the moniker Demon of the Hidden Mist. How scary it was for Team 7 to battle Zabuza when he could and would disappear randomly throughout the fight, really putting them on the back foot. And I wanted to replicate that feeling. At this point, we can stop here since we now have a nice legendary Oni on our hands. However, I'll go through the logic of the next 3 steps for this Oni. My Oni will have a lair or base that he'll return to every night to eat his victims and rest. His lair will have 2 different lair actions. Continuing with the Zabuza feeling, the area around his hut will become obscured with fog as if the fog cloud spell was cast, with the second lair action affecting only creatures directly next to or inside of his hut, with the sleep spell cast at first level. These lair actions make sense for my Oni on a thematic level, keeping the area around his hut hidden and trapping anyone foolish enough or unlucky enough to get that close. Since my Oni only serves the purpose of being more of a field boss or a world boss instead of a creature integral to my campaign's plot, he won't have any minions I can assist. With that, we now have the final legendary stat block for our Oni, and a practical example of a martial type creature getting a legendary glow up. For our legendary flyer template, I'll be using the Lion Drake from Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. So, step 1 is to increase his survivability. I'll take his normal 119 HP, round it to 120, and then double it for a final hit pool of 240. I also included in the stat block what it would look like if I increase his constitution score and hit die, which would give us about 224 HP. And of course, we will be giving him proficiency in constitution saving throws. Moving on to the next step in the process, we'll be looking at his action economy. This is the most intensive step in my opinion, as there's a lot to take into consideration for how you want your creature to feel as it maneuvers the battlefield. First and foremost, we need to examine the base stat block our creature has and see what actions we have to work with. For the Lion Drake, it has a bite attack that has an initial effect to possibly knock its target prone, which is great for us. I added the save for later ability, which allows the Lion Drake to stomp on prone creatures as a bonus action. This wording could be changed to only allow it to stomp on creatures it personally knocked prone, but that's up to you. Along with this new bonus action, I've given the Lion Drake the brace reaction. Unlike the Oni, who is more of a bruiser who relies on his regeneration to bully through fights, the Lion Drake is going to use his wings to make both approaching him and shooting projectiles at him very difficult. His brace reaction will instead pose disadvantage on all incoming attacks for that round. I know this might feel like it's too powerful, but with how low the base AC is for the Lion Drake, this shouldn't pose too much of a problem for your party. So for his offensive legendary action, I'll be giving the Lion Drake a single claw attack for 1 legendary action. I chose this over the bite because we wouldn't even be able to chain the bite and stomp attacks together with legendary actions, making it kind of a wasted combo. On top of that, this keeps the extra damage being dealt to a more manageable level without overtly complicating the encounter. As for the movement legendary action, it can be a bit tricky to approach since this is primarily a flying creature. Flying creatures being able to move vertically is a major advantage for them. And thus, to balance this, most flying legendary creatures' movements are normally limited. We'll be using the wing attack that dragons have for the lion drake. This allows the lion drake to fly up to half their movement speed, well, their flying speed, while doing a bit of damage. My lion drake will not have a special ability for a 3 action, so we'll move on to the next step. Now that we've already fixed the action economy, making it a lot more robust, we can determine if legendary resistances are necessary. I will be giving my lion drake legendary resistances based on my party's playstyle. Moving on to the optional steps, I imagine my lion drake playing more of a legendary creation by a mad alchemist or magic user, so he will not have any lair actions or minions himself. He is the minion to my end boss. With that, we now have our legendary flying creature. Casters slash magic users are very tricky when it comes to balance, since a well-placed spell or enough failed saves can completely devastate the party and end the encounter outright. However, they are not undeserving of getting the legendary upgrade package. I'll be using Cruel as our caster model from Baldur's Gate instead of the stereotypical Archmage for a few reasons. He has a great spell list like other caster stat blocks, while also having more than just spells to sling at the party. He also has a great action economy example of why certain offensive legendary actions will require 2 legendary actions to perform. Now, as with the other templates, the first thing we need to do is increase his survivability and his ability to resist conditions and maintain concentration. So I'm going to round his 117 HP to 120 and then double that, along with giving him proficiency in Constitution saving throws. I also show what it would look like if you decide to tweak the hit points based on the Constitution score and hit dice manipulation instead. This will equate to about 220 total hit points. Action economy wise, it gets tricky as adding too many extra actions can really unbalance a caster. He will not have any bonus actions, but I have decided to give him the Brace reaction, where he can prepare himself for an attack and take half damage on the next attack that hits. Legendary action wise, this is where Cruel the Skull Crusher really begins to feel like a legendary monster. On top of his killer spell list, for offensive legendary actions, he will have 2 different options he can pick from. For a single legendary action, he will be able to cast a cantrip, while for 2 legendary actions, he will be able to make a single attack with his maul. Due to the extra necrotic damage that he can do, that also ignores resistances. For his movement legendary action, it will simply be moving up to half his movement speed without provoking attacks of opportunity. Although he is incredibly strong, he won't be playing the type as a brute to knock creatures prone. If you want to use a different caster stat block, another possible movement legendary action would be a teleport. This would be a short distance teleport like Misty Step, but without costing a spell slot. This 30-foot teleport will help keep your caster out of melee range enough that your party can't just completely surround him and whack away, while also allowing him to get the proper positioning they might need to effectively fight your party. Remember, most casters are either wise or intelligent. They didn't become legendary for nothing. They're smart and they know how to fight. As for the special ability, the secret technique for Cruel will be to use his Shell Defense for 3 legendary actions. This will give Cruel more flexibility to switch between offense and defense on the fly depending on how my party approaches him. Cruel has a strong chance to resist / save on most saving throws anyways, meaning I don't think it's necessary to give him legendary resistances on top of that. Because as seen with his new action economy, even his physical defenses are pretty high. Cruel to me is a wandering death priest. He has followed his own set of morals and beliefs based on his deity. He doesn't have a lair and lair actions by extent, but he could have some minions. I personally think having 1d4 plus 2 skeletons or low CR undead minions would make a lot of sense for him. If he's able to get off a high level hold person off on a good chunk of the party, he would be confident enough to also either cast Animate Dead or create Undead, making the group watch as he continues to summon more minions. Cruel the Skull Crushing Death Turtle will leave a very strong and very lasting memory for my party for sure. Now, hopefully you fellow DMs have found this guide helpful for creating not just legendary creatures, but some epic sessions to remember for your groups. If you did, please make sure to like this video and comment down below which creatures you've given a legendary upgrade to. Keep your eyes open for part 2, where I go over a more thematic approach to creating legendary creatures. And in the meantime, if you want to know how I approach balancing encounters, you can check out my video on that over here. Or if you're looking for more or new uncommon encounters, feel free to check out my encounter series. But yeah, See you guys next time.